Hi, this is Eric Myers. I'm a partner and chief legal officer for Global Cultiva, and it is my absolute and distinct pleasure to be talking today to AnneZJafery, who's originally from Michigan, but she spent the majority of her adult life in the Middle East, particularly the UAE, the United Arab Emirates. She is currently the Arab Gulf Trade Representative for many states. He's an ex officio president or the ex officio president of AmCham Dubai. That's AmCham is American Chamber, where she was the first and only female president in the history of the organization in 2006 and again in 2018. And she's currently the chairman emeritus of the Middle East Council of American Chambers of Commerce. She's a former trustee of the American School of Dubai and was an instrumental part of the team that was responsible for financing and constructing the campus there at a cost of over 144 million US dollars. She's first and foremost an entrepreneur, and she has a quote that I'm a big fan of. She says, look, what differentiates an entrepreneur from everybody out there with good ideas is the courage to act. And she has the courage to act. In 2007 and 2008, at the height of the global recession, she started not one, not two, but three different companies that were all successful and thrived after that. Managing partner of Channels MEA, that's a service provider for the U.S. Department of Commerce International Trade Administration. So welcome, Anne. How are you today?
I'm great. How are you, Eric?
I'm excellent, excellent. Listen, I want to jump right into this. We're going to be talking today about the United Arab Emirates, the UAE. So tell us a little bit about the history of it. Like, when did the country come into being? What's the demographics? Like, how big of a country is it? And what are the demographics? What are the people there?
So UAE it was under the protection, it was a trucial state of the United Kingdoms, part of their huge kingdom. And they became independent in 1971. So they are, next year will be their 50th anniversary. Look at the UAE, they have 7 city-states: Abu Dhabi, which is the capital and the seat of the federal government, Dubai, Sharjah, Al Quwain, Fujairah, etc., 7 of them. And they all operate similar to the United States in terms of there's a federal government and there's state government, and there's sometimes overlap. So there's approximately 10 million people. Only 10% of that population is actually Emirati. The rest of the people there are third country nationals. 59% of them come from the countries of India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and the rest are other Arab nations and the United States. Great Britain has a large population there just by virtue of the fact that they were one of the first in. If you think about size, I always like to give references that people can relate to. So in terms of the geographic size, it's approximately the same size as South Carolina.
Do they have a high per capita GDP? Or?
They do. It's one of the highest in the world, but it's not the highest.
But still, we'll take high.
Yeah, that's up by one of their neighbors, actually. Because less people and more money.
Hey, I understand in UAE that they have a big emphasis now on increasing the national excellence in education at every level, and especially at secondary or the higher education. And that includes attracting U.S. universities that come there, like international, like NYU, Abu Dhabi, Michigan State's got some degrees, and American University is there, it's accredited. So my question is, how can American universities take advantage of this? How can they get in on this?
Well, they just have to come. I know that most of the time in my work, because we helped over 300 companies, small companies in the U.S. last year with market entry, and not just UAE, but around the Arab Gulf. And the biggest obstacle I always have is actually convincing them that it's viable, that there's opportunity there, and that it's not scary. So then I get them to actually come to the market, and they look around and they think, this is amazing. I mean, it looks more like Miami. There's so many different nationalities there. There's more Starbucks on every corner than you find in my small town that I came from. And then it's more of a problem of teaching them that it's a bit different culturally doing business, and then trying to get them to go back home. So it's a catch-22 one way or the other.
So the threat is that they won't want to leave. I mean, that's the real danger.
We always tell people, don't let your boss come, because next thing you know, he'll get rid of you and he'll be sitting here. And we've seen it happen, actually. Yeah, I think that they're definitely thirsty for higher education. They always have put great emphasis. I mean, the founding father of the nation was very vocal about the importance. The wealth of your country is really measured by the education of your people. So originally they would send their students who would qualify to the US for school. So the US or the UK were the top two locations, really. But at a certain point, they decided that I mean, some things definitely happened that kind of triggered this realization that they needed to build up the nascent higher education in their own country. And as they tried to attract higher education universities and so forth, like when MSU first came over, they were one of the first ones to look at the country. The challenge was making sure that they could provide a student base that was capable of being, that they wouldn't have to lower their standards of admission to actually fill their classrooms. So, yeah, so KHDA, which is the Knowledge and Human Development Authority, which is like the assessment body, they took a step back and said, okay, what do we need to do to prepare students? And it's not preparing them once they go off to college and take a TOEFL class so they can speak English. It's more about preparing them as they're coming through K through 12. So they put in place assessment and accreditation body standards. They started hosting more classes, even in the local schools, which are in Arabic, hosting more classes in English, bringing tablets and technology into the classroom. So they really have a great skill at being very self-reflective about what do we need to do to accomplish these major goals. So now they've got to a point where they're more in a position to offer these types of students. And I mean, certainly the generation now is all about not just being a doctor or a lawyer or a businessman. They're looking for, more technical degrees, more, nano degrees.
Well, one of the things on the students that struck me in reading over some materials on this was 70% of all university graduates are women and 56% of STEM graduates, those hard science, engineering, and all, mathematics and all of those. So what's the role of women in higher education in UAE as well?
I think that one of the reasons why you see more of the students in UAE being female is because of the family. A lot of the more conservative families don't want their daughters to go outside, but these young women are very motivated towards working. So, I mean, they want their freedom in whatever way they can. They are traditionally, they work hard. And His Highness has said that he truly realizes that the women of the country are the secret weapon of the development goals of the country, right? So they created this whole UAE space program because they were looking for ways to increase interest in STEM. And what they ended up with by creating this, they had their first Mars mission, the HOPE mission, this past summer during COVID, in fact. And if you look at that program, you see that like 80% of the scientists that worked on that were Emirati women. So
now their space program, that sounds exciting. That was a probe. I guess that wasn't actual people there, right?
Right.
Which is great. So wait a minute. So everything you said, though, would be also true of the men in UAE. They want to go to college, they want to work. And also, why is it women? Do they have a special program, or is there, or why? Why is all this 70%?
So they are very motivated. They're more serious about their studies. if it's a man and he's at that same level, educational
Mhm.
attainment level, and he has the opportunity to go overseas, you will see that they will go overseas.
Ah,
Bring
okay.
them back.
I see. So
So
more of the men go overseas and the women stay.
yes, so
That
I
makes
think that,
sense.
there's a big opportunity. That gap is closing more and more as the UAE is
Mhm.
encouraging more of their young female students to go out. I mean, the people that I met when I first went to UAE, they were just they were children then. Now, the females, one is a doctor, one is a lawyer. So it's something that started probably pre-millennial, but is now really picking up speed and steam. I listened to a webinar this morning on education, higher education, um, that was all Emiratis talking about going to universities in the US. And they did address that topic of women, more women being encouraged to go abroad to be educated. But I mean, UAE is all about sustainability now, and part of sustainability is building the university infrastructure there to create the future workforce that they need. Whereas they had always, a lot of the leadership and the skill gap was filled by third country nationals. Now they're very much invested in having their own people, their own nationals in those positions of leadership across every industry. So I think that that's where we've seen a change in terms of, let's create our own higher education. So that's when you see like NYU comes in. You see it like right around 2005, 2006, they start forming these assessment bodies like KHDA and increasing the input into like increasing the level of education K1 through 12. Then you also see that they are putting that whole Emiratization
Yeah,
program.
what is that? Can you explain what that is and the impact of it?
Yeah, so Emiratization, they put this in place, I believe, in 2005. And what the program is making it mandatory. The reason for it was to pull the Emiratis into the private sector, because traditionally all of these well-educated Emirati students who would come back from overseas or from within their own system would want government jobs because they're really great jobs. They had less hours, they could do other things in their own personal business after they worked in their government jobs. But the leadership saw that they needed to get more of the nationals into the private sector. So they created this Emiratization program and made it mandatory for certain sectors to hire a certain percentage of national employees. So for instance, in banking, I think you have to hire 4% of your manpower has to be Emirati. In insurance, 5%. In general companies, if you have over 50 employees, you have a responsibility to hire 2% of your workforce there. But again, you came to the position where, okay, if you want to impose on the private sector that they must employ nationals, you also have to be willing to raise the national population's education level and capability level, so that it's not just like, we're going to sit this person in front of this desk, in this desk, in front of this computer, and not expect anything from them. Because that's the way it started. When you say, but they were wise in that way too. I mean, the Sheikh came out and very publicly said that, I understand that the people are not prepared for the job. So let's work together and get this. And then you see all different kinds of programs emerging from there.
Great. The financing of higher education in the UAE, or I guess education overall, but particularly higher education, who pays for it? Does the government pay? Do the individual families? Is there corporations? How does that work?
Well, if you're a UAE national, your school is paid for. So let's take NYU, for example.
Mhm.
NYU is invested in attracting the highest level students. They are invested in they want Emiratis there, but they also want diversity there. So if you're an Emirati, you go to school at NYU for free. And it's blind admissions. So the admissions team can't see where you're from or anything like that. They're just looking at your credentials. if you are approved for admission and you're a non-national, then you can qualify for merit scholarships as well as financial aid. So they've made it almost free to go to school there. I mean, my daughter's friend, she went to NYU Abu Dhabi. I was like, really?
Wow.
Back in the, yeah, that was, she's a bit older, so it's probably about 3 or 4 years ago. So that was pretty impressive. But in terms of general education, you're seeing more and more like apprenticeships.
Yeah, so they have a lot of apprenticeship. Do they have a specific apprenticeship program there?
You'll find that because like these big companies that are there, like the Boeings and a lot of the major defense companies and GMs and those kind of companies who are have been there for years and are a major part of the infrastructure there and depend a lot on the region. They put together all kinds of programs that involve education. So they're very much invested in amortization and
does it work like the apprenticeship they work like they do in the US, basically?
Yeah.
Okay, let me ask you something. Going back to the financing, do they have a particular income share agreement program there at ISCs? First of all, explain what that is and what's the effect on, financing and new collar workers and all those being. Anyway, tell us about that too.
Yeah. So they're very much cognizant of the fact that that there's no standard mold, right? So they like new collar workers, these nano degrees. It's like the millennials now. They've kind of broken the mold in terms of what a job should look like.
Well, first of all, what is a new collar worker?
New collar worker is a technical certification program. So you don't go to you don't get like a degree, you get a skill. So it's more it's specifically transferable into a job.
I have one last question. I lied before. I actually have one more question. And that is, if somebody needs to get in touch or wants to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to get in touch with you?
Best way is always email. And my email
and what is that?
Anne, ANNE, at channels, CHANNELS, MEA, so Middle East Africa.com.
Great. So that's the best way. I want to thank you so much for taking time out of your busy day, as we're all busy. Let me go ahead and say this. If anybody needs to get in touch with me, I'm Eric Myers, emyers@globalcultiva.com. We'll put these up on the screen so I won't have to spell it out. Or you can go to our website, globalcultiva.com. But again, thank you so much for taking time out of your very busy and very crowded schedule to talk to us today. I hope we can talk again in the future.